This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a popular and highly acclaimed actress and director who became internationally renowned for her performance as Annette in the phenomenally successful and iconic movie Saturday Night Fever, for which she was nominated for a New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Supporting Actress. And of course, she's well remembered for her starring role in the TV sitcom Angie, which earned her a Golden Globe Award nomination for Best Actress in a Comedy Series and a People's Choice Award nomination for Favorite Female TV Performer. She also played Dr. Lynn Carson in All My Children, Donna Garland in Out of This World, the villainous Gertrude Morgan in General Hospital, Dr. Sharon Finkel in The Flash, and of course, Eileen Stevens in the very enjoyable multi-award-winning Disney Channel comedy series Even Stevens, for which she received 3 Daytime Emmy Award nominations for Outstanding Performer in a Children's Series. She also appeared in a number of great TV shows like Trapper John M.D., Fantasy Island, Hotel, Nash Bridges, NYPD Blue, The Sopranos, Grey's Anatomy, and we've seen her in many TV movies including Rainbow, Human Feelings, The Day the Bubble Burst, Dead Husbands, Operation Cupcake, Welcome to Chippendales, and many more. I'm delighted to welcome the wonderful Donna Pescow to our show. Donna, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
Donna, I want to take you back to your 13th birthday when you were taken to see Funny Girl on Broadway starring the one and only Barbra Streisand. What was the impact on you of seeing that show in terms of your desire to be a performer?
You know, I think I was always sort of destined to be a performer. I don't know if I ever really settled on what that would be. But once I saw that show, it was acting, it was Broadway, it was just celebrating all of that, but in a way that I was just geared to make it happen. It was huge. I mean, it was a big defining moment for me at that age.
I can't imagine you doing anything else but being a performer because you have a glow about you. And I learned in my research that you auditioned 6 times for the role of Annette in Saturday Night Fever for both the original director and John Badham, who ended up replacing him. How much about the role did you actually know while you were going through that process?
I knew nothing. I got sides, which were just little snippets of the script. And I had not even auditioned for a film before that. So my agent at the time was so wise and said, "Oh, no, this is nothing. Don't worry about it. Just this is how it works in film. They just keep calling you back." And I had 3 auditions with John Avildsen at first. And then when John Badham replaced him, I had another 3. And I thought, this is so much auditioning for a little tiny role. And I didn't know the size of the role till I got the part, which was kind of amazing and scary.
I could imagine it was scary. I'm trying to imagine you on the set of Saturday Night Fever. There you were, having studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. You appeared off Broadway in Poor Old Fool. You were in several touring companies of that show. And suddenly there you are. It's your first movie and you're filming a movie out of sequence. Was that difficult for you?
It was weird. It was crazy. But the good thing was I had recently graduated maybe a year before from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And I had also been studying with Lee Strasberg since there. So I was so into acting and the art of acting that I had that to rely on. And I had kind of sequenced it in my head where it was kind of going. But, you know, when you're a young actor and you're just starting out and you can use all those things you've learned, you know, it's like this huge safety net. And, you know, because I didn't understand the business, which again was a blessing, I only worried about the performance. I didn't worry about whether it be successful or not. I thought, well, maybe I'll get another job first, you know, after that. But but I had really just focused in on the work, which was great.
I have to tell you something. I'm going to try not to get all verklempt, but right around the time that the movie came out, I came out to my parents as gay and was totally rejected. It was a very bad time for me. And when I saw that very intense scene on the Brooklyn Bridge, Donna, you saved my life.
No.
You really did. You really saved my life when I saw what your character did. I don't know what filming that scene did to you on an emotional level, but you helped a lot of people. I'm sure I'm not the only one who rethought whether they should end it all. And I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, but I'm so glad I get to tell you.
Wow, Harvey, I'm blown away here. But I think that scene was such a culmination of who that girl was. And she was a part of all of us, wrong choices, naive about what was really going around and at the time society wise and all. But I think people identified with her because they really went from A to Z with this character. And you kind of have this hope that it's not going to go to the worst case scenario, which is maybe what was going on with you. I mean, I'm astounded that you had to go through any of that, but that it got to that point for you. But I think that's why the character touched so many people, because she really ran the gamut of going from, one bad move to another and, hopefully could recover from it. But it was choices. I think, again, you have to choose. It's your life. How are you going to handle it? And it's your decision, not anyone else's.
I felt that your character taught me to lower my expectations, to not be so disappointed in people, to not let their behavior affect me the way your character was affected by the disappointments that she experienced because of the expectations she had about other people. Was it tough for you emotionally doing that scene?
Yeah, I mean, the director, John Badham, was very sensitive and had a closed set, and people that didn't have to be there weren't. And we did that. We didn't really do that on the bridge. We did that in I think it was like a garage kind of studio thing. But, we had talked about it a lot. And I think, I went through what I thought she was emotionally going through at the time. And this is the great thing about John Badham. He's such an actor's director. There's such trust that develops during the process of working with him. So it wasn't as scary as it might have been if I hadn't had it sort of mapped out with him on where it would go. And of course, once we're shooting it, it goes beyond that because you're in the moment. So yeah, it was tough, but at the same time, it was handled so well by, John and the crew that it was not as bad as it could have been.
Well,
Really.
your character provided the emotional depth of the movie. Besides all the dancing and the music and sexy John Travolta, you were the character that provided the viewers with a sense that this was real people, that there's real emotional consequences to the choices we make. And I got to tell you, and I had the feeling when I was watching the movie that it felt like parts of it were improvised, not in the script.
A lot of it was. But again, that was the trust that had developed between John and the cast, John Badham and the cast. And I think all the actors and John Travolta set the tone. He totally set the tone of that film for everyone because we were all new. None of us had really done any film before except John. And it was such a united group trying to make this as good as possible and push the envelope a little bit. And all the elements were there for people to really take a risk every now and then or improvise something and just feel comfortable in the skin of the character. And then you could do that and not feel like it's just kind of imposed upon you. So that was the beauty of making that film, is that everybody, I think, stretched as an actor. And I think everybody had such joy in doing the work and not being held back.
I know that you and John appeared together in a TV commercial at Christmas for Capital One, but other than that, did you ever work with John Travolta again after Saturday Night Fever?
Never did, no. Almost did with the sequel to Saturday Night Fever, but that was totally, that was a strange thing. It was a script that was, I think it kept getting reinvented as it went on, in the sense that where the character would go and how that would open up. And there was a Brooklyn section in there where he comes back, and then we all go see him in the show. And it didn't work. The way, because he'd finally left that place and those people to an extent. And between that and everybody's availability who was in the first one, they ended up not putting that in. So I didn't film much. I filmed like a little tiny bit, but it was righter without that. It felt more natural without him having to go back to the neighborhood. So no, we never did. We had so much fun on that Capital One commercial. It was really,
it looked like you were having fun. You know, there were so many iconic moments in the movie, especially John's solo dancing in that white suit on the disco floor that was all lit up. I want to ask you, Donna, when you're watching a scene like that being filmed in that extreme heat with John having to do it over and over and over again, can you visualize in your head what it's going to look like on the screen and that it's going to be so magical?
Again, because it was the first time I'd done a feature, I kind of understood where it was going, but I didn't necessarily visually picture it completely. But the dance sequence, and this film had such a small budget. Let me just go back for a minute. And the set designer and the director and the crew tried to make this big movie out of a small budget. And they did it with imagination. And at one point, somebody put aluminum foil on the walls to have this great kind of shine to it. And the floor had this heavy duty plastic top. I don't know if it was plastic, but lucite maybe. But anyway, and they used a smoke effect, the one you're talking about, that was done, again, you know, not with great special effects, kind of whatever they could figure out to use. And they used dry ice at one point, and the floor got so wet that it looked like the Ice Capades. It was, people were flying all over them. It was so funny that, you know, and they had to keep mopping up the floor after every take. And John, when he did his solo, had a lot of takes, obviously, but the windows had to be all of it. There was no air really in there, other than whatever. There was no generator on for because it was too noisy. Again, you know, it wasn't like this high-end thing. And this guy, I don't know how he did that without, you know, needing a nurse to revive him each time. He just gave it all every time he did it, and it was 100 degrees in there. I mean, it was crazy. It was just astounding. But when you see what's going on, even live, you know it's going to be special, especially that scene with John, because the work was astounding.
Yeah, it wasn't a very iconic scene. Now, you're one of the few movie stars who really supports your fans. You've gone to many, many events over the years honoring Saturday Night Fever. You've sat through, I don't know how many screenings. What goes through your head when you watch your performance in that movie?
It's funny. It's like it feels like yesterday, and it feels like a lifetime ago simultaneously. And I'm not great at watching myself anyway. I get very overcritical, and I just can't be objective until I've seen it a lot, or there's a lot of time between me making it and me seeing it. But this film was such a point in my life where I became an actor for real. I think that's really the best way to say it, because I finally had material that was so extraordinary and so enormous to stretch as an artist. This is not to say I did incredible plays and, you know, with crazy great authors, but I had little tiny parts, so I was learning a ton from watching, all these greats do their roles, and then I'd come on and do my little thing. But this was a lead part, and I'd never had one before, so that was pretty amazing. But when I see it, I guess the reactions from people touch my heart the same way, because everybody knew someone like her. Everybody was, to some extent, a little of her. And they so relate to the journey, not necessarily what she goes through, but what happens in that part of your life when you don't know who you are yet, and you kind of follow what you think you should do versus what you find out you should have done. So I am so grateful for the fans and how they still to this day talk about it as if they just saw it. It's amazing to me.
Oh, it's a timeless classic movie. What did you think of Saturday Night Fever, the Broadway show?
It was fun. It was fun. It was weird for me to watch it because it was it really did this amazing thing where they hired actors who kind of looked like us to some extent, but they were they were so talented. And so it took it to another place, a different place, because it was a musical, but it was odd, but it was exciting. And then I went backstage afterwards, and the girl that was playing was just a sensational actress. And she sort of freaked out that I was there, and I sort of freaked out with how great she was. And it was just this kind of beautiful moment of appreciating the material in two different ways.
Yeah, that's such a nice way to put it. Well, at the risk of getting verklempt again, I'm going to tell you that I watched some footage of the premiere, the New York premiere, and I saw that your grandfather, who was a movie projectionist in one of those big, beautiful movie palaces in New York, he was your date at the New York premiere. That must have been such a special night for you.
When he was a projectionist, he worked at this incredibly gorgeous, the RKO Albee. And it was this grand, grand theater that was a vaudeville house prior to it becoming a movie theater. And he worked there from that time on. So this was, his second home in a sense. And I would go on Saturdays with him and sit in the booth and watch movies. And he was very funny. And during vaudeville, he was stage manager, whatever. And he learned all these routines because he just adored it. And I was the only 8-year-old who could do Who's on First. The Abbott and Costello, Who's on First. He taught me how to do that. He taught me old Smith and Dale routines. So he was so into all of it, in the sense that he loved the art of making people laugh or moving them dramatically or whatever. And my first day of shooting, he drove me to the set, and it was so amazing because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I had to meet, it was in Brooklyn, in that neighborhood, and I had to meet the assistant director on a certain street, and he didn't want to leave until the assistant director came. And I said, please go. I wanted to think I got here on my own. It was like, he said, no, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving till I know you're safe and it's okay. And ultimately, it became sort of normal, and he just was always so supportive and always just, my backbone of trying things. He really was supportive as all get out. And I couldn't imagine going with anyone else. But the nice thing was, my mom and my stepdad and my sister and her husband, we looked like clowns getting out of a Volkswagen, but we all went. I was nervous about that section, when she's in the backseat of the car and that's all happening. I sort of warned them about, without getting too explicit. And again, he was so hip. I said, after it was, or I said, you okay? And he said, I've been running movies for 50 years. You think I'm going to believe this is real? It was good work, and I just thought, how amazing, how amazing.
And how amazing for him to see his beloved granddaughter appearing in a major motion picture and going to the premiere. I didn't even know you, and I was proud of you.
Thank you. That's great. That's so great.
Now, there's no question, Donna, that you became an overnight sensation when Saturday Night Fever came out. Everybody was fascinated with you. How did you cope with suddenly becoming so famous? Was fame what you thought it would be?
I never thought about it. I didn't think, I thought about being successful, which was great, but I never thought about what fame was and what that does to your life and how people react to you. And I remember I had an audition, a Broadway show audition, and I was walking down Broadway, and there was a theater that had this little kind of kiosk in the front of it and a little screen, and they would show the trailers of upcoming films. And I see this group of people sort of standing around this thing and looking at it, and I thought, I don't know what that. So I went over there to see what it was, and it was the Saturday Night Fever trailer, and I had not seen it yet, and I was sort of mesmerized by the fact that not only that it was Saturday Night Fever, but I was in it, and I'm standing there, and somebody said, "Hey, is that you? Isn't that you?" And I said, "Yeah," and I was not so oblivious to the fact that saying yeah would then prompt other things. So he says, "Hey, this is her right here. Look at this. It's right here." And I was so freaked out. I just kind of said, "Well, bye." And I took off running because it just scared the hell out of me, but not in a dangerous way, but just being recognized like that was so freaky to me. So, it's a gradual learning process, I think.
Well, yeah, you lost your anonymity for sure. Now, this may seem like an odd question, Donna, but I want to ask you this. As you know, for most stars, they work their way up for a few years doing little parts, and then eventually they get a big breakout role. But in your case, at the age of 22, your very first movie is a major blockbuster hit, and then suddenly you're very much in demand. But then inevitably, there's always a dip or a lull in a career because that's just how the industry is. How did you cope with that the first time it happened?
That's such a great question. Because I always say I've had a backwards career in many ways. And it's exactly the way you described it. Usually you lead up to something. And to start that way, I had this phrase, act as if. I never knew what was going on around me, and I never knew how intense it was going to be. I was having meetings with Dino De Laurentiis and Ray Stark and all these people, and I couldn't mentally be there because I kept thinking, why am I here? I mean, I knew they liked my work and I was thrilled about that, but I did not know how to cope with being with these incredible legends. And ultimately you just kind of make yourself feel comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. But I was so lucky because people that I would have meetings with or met were so understanding about that even before I got there. They knew she's a real neophyte here. And I remember I had lunch with Herb Ross and Neil Simon, and I was going to do a play for Neil Simon. And I was totally freaked out. And Herb Ross was shooting California Suite at the time. So we went to the commissary, and Herb was going to be involved in this other project. So at the time, remember, we would wear long scarves, but not tie them, just kind of wear them. And so I'm wearing this scarf, and I'm having this lunch with these iconic, brilliant. It was just talking, and I my eating, and finally Neil said, "Do you know you've been wiping your mouth with your scarf this whole lunch?" And I just started laughing. I said, "Well, yeah, I knew that." And he started laughing, but that was what it took. It took a moment of being okay with not knowing what the hell I was doing. Once I got on set, I was fine. It was all of that stuff that led up to it. I think also, you get to a place, for me anyway, I was so blessed that I started working immediately after that with Angie and a couple of other films and all. And then the lull happens after you have never experienced it. And so I went from having everything given to me by these incredible people opportunities. And then it shifted. There was an actor strike at that time. I went back to New York and I did a club act, which was a lot of fun. And then all these films I was supposed to do when that was over got either canceled or went into turnaround. And I had nothing that I could walk into after that. So there was this big gap. And I think while that was going on, there were other people that were starting to come up and all of that. And it's not that I wasn't on the list, but maybe I wasn't on the list for maybe the first 10 people, the first 20 people. It changes. And that's when I realized you have to have a personal life. Because if you make that the only thing you do, your self-esteem will be on a roller coaster forever. And so I started to concentrate a little bit more on what makes me happy outside of that. And I think I started doing some theater again, which I loved, which was kind of low key, but I loved the work. So I would take a part in a play that was off Broadway and not necessarily a giant hit, but it was so wonderful to do as an artist. I met my husband. I didn't want to get serious with anybody for a long time because I didn't want to take away from my availability or whatever. And that was wonderful because I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of nice having a life. So I think the great thing about that lull for me was I was able to put things in order, in priority order, and I think that's why I'm sane, because if you rely totally on the industry giving you everything you need to be a complete person, you won't get it, no matter what, no matter who you are, because there are too many hills and valleys. There are too many insincere people. There's a great line, show business is the only place you can die of encouragement. And I think that's it. You're going to meet people who will definitely tell you the truth, and you're going to meet people who will never tell you the truth. So there's a balance, and I've been really lucky. And maybe part of it's coming from a background where you have to be savvy, but there's a lot of difficulties trying to disassociate a business decision with a personal decision. And not, if something doesn't work out, it may not be because of you, it could be 10 million other reasons. And if you base your own worth on that, it's not going to happen at all for you in any part of your life.
You are one of the most grounded and centered celebrities I've ever met because you had that very healthy way of dealing with those lulls. And when you were talking about that first period after the movie got big and suddenly you're having lunch with all of these biggies, you remind me when Carol Kane came on the show, she said that after her first movie, she got this Oscar nomination. It was Hester Street. And she said that it took her a while to believe that she deserved the attention she got. Did you feel that way?
Absolutely. And I kept thinking I had to have a part that kept that alive. I had to have a part that important or that intricate in order to keep that buzz or whatever, that where people say, oh, she's good. Let's forgive her for, this role. And again, it's all a learning experience. And I thought, no, finally, I thought, well, I don't need to always have a big movie. I can, I did television with Angie and I loved that. And so sometimes one of two things would come up and agents would say, well, you got to go with the movie. You got to go with this movie. And I say, yeah, but look at this. This is a great part. And I like this better, for me as an actor, I want to do this. And so you start to get a little bit stronger in your own belief. Takes a while because you don't think you're good enough to make the decisions. That was a big problem for me. I let a lot of people tell me which way to go, even if I didn't agree with it. But I was in my 20s. I had no clue. Suddenly I'm in this giant film and being sought after by people that I had no idea how to talk to. So it was, I know exactly what Carol meant by that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no school you can go to know how to deal with that kind of success. Now, I want to mention in 1978, you played Judy Garland's older sister, Jimmy Gum, one of the Gum sisters in the wonderful TV movie Rainbow. How did you prepare for that role?
It's so funny. This was one of those times where I was signed to a film that ultimately went into turnaround, and I didn't have anything, at that moment to do, and this came along. And who doesn't love Judy Garland and the story behind her life and all of that? And this was so great because Jackie Cooper directed it, and they were dear, dear friends. And he would, talk about those days of studio days where they all were kids and studio schools and all of this. And I thought, just working with him alone. But then the script was wonderful. Piper Laurie played the mom. Andrea McArdle had just started to become a known person from Annie. And it was just sort of a love letter to her and to Judy Garland. And I thought, wow, and Don Murray played my dad. I mean, it was just this extraordinary cast. And I thought, I can't say no to this. That would be insane. It would be crazy. And I just think I was starting to get to this point where maybe people that were, and I had great representation, but they thought I had to do something bigger and, a large project that maybe, I didn't have the greatest role in, or I didn't have a great love for the material, and then not do something like this. And I said, you know what? I want to do this. I want to be with these people. I want to do this project. I know it's not, but it's a great TV project. And that's, I think, was a big moment and I had, by the way, had a ball doing it. It was the greatest group of people, and Jackie Cooper, I mean, my God. But I realized, or I started to realize, that I did have a vote in my own career.
I'm so glad you did that movie. But I do remember there being a lot of criticism when the movie came out over the casting of Andrea McArdle as Judy Garland, because she didn't even remotely look or sound like Judy. What did you think of her performance?
She was so young and unbelievably talented. And they wanted her to do that because of all of the success from Annie that she had. And I don't know if Andrea at the time knew, I'm sure she knew who Judy Garland was, and they gave her material to look at and all of that. But she was so young and she was so different than Judy Garland, and just as a person. And I think she worked her tail off, this sweet little thing, and there's very little you can ever do to imitate or to honor a legend like her and come away with good reviews, because she's so iconic, she's so beloved, and no matter how amazing the performance is, if you compare it to her in her real life, it's never going to mesh. You have to kind of look at it as an homage more than this was the way it went, so I again, and also reviews for me are not, it's like watching myself. I wait. I don't read them right away. I wait. And unless people are talking about them, I often don't even know, because it makes me too uncomfortable or too nervous. And I think my self-esteem gets a hit if it's about the film, or I've been lucky not to, do a performance where it got slammed, but it's very hard to read that because the work that goes into the project.
So, for sure. Well, it was a lovely movie. Now, in 1978, you co-starred in a delightful TV movie called Human Feelings, with Nancy Walker playing God. Billy Crystal played an unhappy angel trying to find the meaning of his existence. What was it like working with Nancy Walker and Billy Crystal?
Well, a funny Billy Crystal story. I mean, talk about down to earth and just such a quality human being, and funny and wonderful. And I was a fan of his before I worked with him. So that was, again, another wonderful thing. But he said to me, he said, John used a line in Saturday Night Fever that was part of my act. And I said, what? And he said, he talked about Louis Armstrong in his act, Billy, who was a personal friend of his dad's, I think. And so he got to know him and he had this incredible relationship with him. And Louis Armstrong used to say to Billy, can you dig it? I knew that you could. And John used that line because he loved Billy's act. And Billy said, after that, it looked like I stole it from the movie instead of it was my line to begin with. And I thought, oh my gosh, I never even would have, and I knew it, because that his act was so popular. And I thought, and I told John years later, and he went, I never even put that together. I just loved, and he felt so bad. I mean, this was years later. But anyway, but Billy was wonderful. Nancy was hilarious. Again, this was the time when you had so much fun on the set. It was before COVID and you actually talked to one another. It was before electronics and you actually got to know each other. And it was, if you're working on a fun project and you're working with fun people, it was glorious. Now it's all very different because you look at a bunch of actors or crew, whoever, in between shots, and they're on their phones, they're on their iPads, they're not communicating as much. And those were the days where you got to know the people you were working with, which was great.
Well, that was just a wonderful movie. Now, you've mentioned Angie, your TV show created by Gary Marshall. When the show first came on TV, Donna, I remember people saying that Angie Falco Benson was the Italian Catholic version of Rhoda Morgenstern. It was played by Valerie Harper. Now, you've always said you're the Jewish girl from Brooklyn who made a career out of being Italian. But what did you think of the comparison with Rhoda Morgenstern?
I love it. And what's really funny is that many of the writers and directors and producers from Rhoda came over to Angie. And so there was the same vibe, I think, for family comedy and what was going on. I was flattered, but that was such, a unique situation because the cast was amazing. I mean, what a cast. And I have a lot of firsts that were big projects that I had to kind of grow into, not on camera, but behind the camera. And Angie was the first series I had done. And starring in a series is in itself sort of daunting. But again, great people around me, great support. Robert Hayes, Doris Roberts, Sharon Spellman. I mean, all of the people on the show had great talent, but they also had great humanity. I remember when the pilot aired, it got a 47 share, and I didn't know what that meant. And one of the hierarchies from Paramount was talking to the cast and said that, and I remember saying, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Did you just say what does that mean?" And I said, I didn't know. It was the first. So then I learned what it meant, and I was very happy to see the numbers every week.
Well, I'm going to tell you what I said to Robert Hayes when he came on the show. I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I got very frustrated as a fan that ABC kept moving the show from Thursday night to Tuesday night to Monday night, then to Saturday night. They made it impossible for people to know when the show would be on. And then sure enough, the show got canceled. What did you make of the way the network was treating your show?
Well, the problem was Gary Marshall had good producers doing the show. He had left to go do movies. And ABC at the time had, I believe, if not all of the top 10 shows, certainly 8 of the top 10 shows. And so they always tried to lead a new show in with an established show or take it off what happened with us also was they took us off the air for a while and then put us back on again because scheduling was so weird. And I remember saying to some people that were ABC executives, is this going to come back? Because normally agents do all this. And I said, because I've got other stuff that I'd like to say yes to, but I would like to do this more than anything if it does come back. And they went, oh, probably, no, I'm sure they will. They don't worry. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? So, and when it didn't come back, I was surprised because people kept alluding to the fact that it would. And there were so many projects I wanted to say yes to. And for months and months, we didn't know what was happening. And I don't mean to sound like, oh, poor me, but it was disappointing because I loved Angie and I would have loved to have done another season. But at the same time, I always felt, do they know and they're not telling us, or did they just not make up their minds, or are they completely disorganized? To this day, I have no clue. And it was a very popular show when it got canceled. And I think, they had so many successful shows and there were only three. It was such a different time, so it got lost in the sauce, unfortunately.
And that really angers a lot of people, including me. I loved the show. I loved the relationship with you and Doris Roberts, who played your mom. My favorite guest star was Danny DeVito, who played Uncle Cheech. Did you have fun with him?
He's so hilarious. So hilarious. Yes, that was a great script and such a funny take on that character. He just killed it. It was so fantastic. We had wonderful storylines and wonderful scripts and great guests. That was one of my favorites too, actually. But, I think it was such a different time for TV. And if it were on now, I think it would have gone further, because I think they aim to keep shows on the air now because they can go into syndication. I don't think we have enough episodes for that to go into syndication. So they didn't think that out. Or if they did, maybe they thought it would still, have a life somewhere else. I don't know.
Would you do another series now if you were offered something really appealing?
Absolutely. Series work is, well, I should say television. If you're doing an hour show, it takes up your entire life. You're working crazy hours. If you're doing a comedy, it used to be banker's hours. If you do a live audience show, you'd go in, 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 or whatever, except for the days you shoot. Then that's a much longer day, but you can have a life at the same time. And one of the reasons I love doing series work was when I was raising my son, I got to see my son or he got to come to the set, so that was a real perk for me because I didn't have as insane a schedule as one would have on an hour show. But I love series work. I love creating a character that has a life beyond one episode. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I would really love to see you come back on a regular basis. I want to ask you about Out of This World. You played Donna Garland, Evie's mother. And although we never saw Troy Garland, Evie's father, who was an extraterrestrial, we heard his voice coming out of a candy dish, and it was the voice of Burt Reynolds, of course. Did you ever get to actually meet Burt Reynolds?
Oh, yeah, I knew Burt. Hilarious. He had a theater in Florida, the Jupiter Theater, that I'd worked at. I did a musical there called My Name is Alice with Marilyn McCoo and just incredibly great New York talent. And Burt was very hands-on with all of that and just the loveliest man in the world. And in fact, my husband Arnold and I got engaged while I was doing that show in Jupiter. And it was an all women's cast, 5 women. And so you can imagine when he came to visit, 5 women, oh, your son, this is so cute. I can't believe it. You're getting engaged. It's so, and it was really, and Burt, had this lovely party for us, which was just so wonderful, sweetest man, and just iconic and funny and lovely.
Yeah, he was a lovely, lovely guy. I always thought that Out of This World was a very sweet show, and it had the same kind of magic and appeal that Bewitched had, don't you think?
It did. In fact, it's so funny you say that because that was my description of it. And I never knew. It's so funny to judge when you read a pilot whether it's going to go further. And I thought, if this goes, it's going to be a big hit. Or it's going to die. There's no middle here. There's no gray area because it was sort of out there with the storyline and all. And NBC did it the first season and put us up right after Cosby or something. So it was, pretty good time slot, and we did very well. And the show ran way longer than I ever thought it would. And I was pregnant during one season, and they just kept shooting me higher and higher and higher because my husband was on another planet, so there was no way this character could be pregnant. And I was so enormous at one point. One of the writers said, "I'm going to write a joke. I want you to be knitting, and the line is going to be, when the exterminators get here, have them throw this over the house," because they just they kept trying to mask me with things. It was, of course, we didn't use that joke, but it was very, very funny. We'd just try and hide me, stand in front of something, in back of something. But it was great. It was a lot of fun. Again, the kids that are on that show, who are all grown up now, I still see them. I still get together with them and have dinners, and it's very hard for me to let go. Even Stevens, same thing in a way, when I watch these kids grow up, and I get very, unfortunately for them, I get very protective and motherly, and I'll open my big mouth and say, "Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not going to help you later on. Be professional."
They're lucky because a lot of young stars have no mentors. I think that's wonderful that you do that. I have to mention, you've appeared in a number of soap operas, One Life to Live, All My Children, General Hospital. But I have to say, in the early 80s, you played Dr. Lynn Carson on All My Children. And I think she was the first lesbian character on a soap opera, right?
It was. And ABC, where Jackie Babin was the executive producer, just incredibly talented. And she wanted a storyline like this. And ABC was really nervous about it. And there was a woman named Joan Dean Checco, who was the casting director. And Joan knew me from the time I was 19, maybe. I used to, and we all have these little jobs we do when we're starting out to support ourselves and all. She gave me the job of being in screen tests for men. So I was the back of the head of when All My Children would audition a man for a leading role. But so she said, let me call Donna Pescow and see if she wants to do this. Because if she does, then ABC won't be upset about or worried about, will people watch and all this, and it's a new storyline, and how will they take it? And so when she called me and told me what was going to hopefully be this character, I said, "I'm in." Yes. How incredible. What a groundbreaking role, and to do a part that could change how people assume someone, who's gay would behave, or, it puts a normalcy on it that should always have been on it to begin with, and I was thrilled to do it. And to this day, I look at that and I think, one of the best things I've ever done, not saying no to something that was so important to do. And the fan mail was just, I would sit there and cry and read this mail. People felt represented.
Yeah, they felt validated as well.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned even Stevens, Donna. You played the matriarch of the Stevens family, a successful, no-nonsense Jewish state senator who launched a campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives, narrowly defeated. Were you channeling Bella Abzug maybe a little bit?
That's hilarious. I think you and I have some sort of telepathy. I don't know.
That's quite an honor.
Well, it's, again, it was not the focal point of the show, obviously, what my career was, but I loved that they put her in a position of power and let her be a mom, and let her be a wife, and let her be a woman, and let her be all of those things that people don't know mix well. So that was wonderful. And again, Sean McNamara, David Brookwell put just the greatest cast and producers and crew together. And Shia was 13 years old. And this just ball of fire. This kid was, you just looked at him and you looked at what he was doing instinctually. instinctually, it was unbelievable. I mean, the raw talent that this kid had was just unbelievable. And all the cast was wonderful. But sometimes you see that and you go, oh, he's gonna go places, this kid. And he did, and he is. I just, I adore these kids.
But were you channeling Bella Abzug?
Without the hat. Didn't she always wear a big hat?
Yeah.
Yes, I was. I was channeling powerful women who were not afraid of the power.
I loved what she used to say, I want a career, but I'm not a career woman. And that's how you projected your role.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, because she was a family woman first.
Yeah. She groundbreaking person. Just all of what she did, and she did it fearlessly.
Yeah, you were great in that. I loved the musical episode, which was called Influenza, the musical, because I believe that episode paved the way for High School Musical.
Yeah, it was all Disney, and this show was the flagship of Disney Channel. And when they talked to me about it, it was, we want to do, I start 5 sentences at one time. We want to do sort of an old-fashioned sitcom, a family show that still has an edge to it and all that, but the same groove that it used to be in the late 70s, 80s, where you tune in every week to see where these people are at, versus, big extreme storylines or whatever, or superpowers and all that. They wanted to create a show that people wanted to see every week. And I loved that. And I loved that it was going to be this rivalry with the kids and all of that. And I thought, it's smart. It's a smart show, and it's going to be nurtured. I knew they were going to put the time into it, so it would be good.
Now, you've done a lot of projects that are really classic and timeless. I'm going to mention another one. Every fan of The Sopranos knows that you appeared in the very last episode called Made in America, which was the series finale. That was a very controversial finale, as you know. What was your experience on the set?
I was such a huge fan of that show that I had to keep the fangirl part of me down, because it was, and I was so excited to meet the people aside from working with the people. And David Chase directed that show. And so there was that element of it. But because it was the last show, it was really emotional for the actors who were regulars on the show, because that was it. It was when they wrapped, that was it. It was over. And there was so much hugging and kissing and crying. And I felt slightly intrusive because it seemed so personal for all these people, but they were wonderful and welcoming. And I so desperately wanted to do that show for so many years. Just amazing to work with people you so admire, and to also break the fourth wall to something you've been watching for so many years and suddenly be a part of it. And David Chase, he's a poker face in a way where you don't necessarily know what he is feeling, or because he's got ideas all the time. He's got ideas coming up. So he said to me at one point, you look at the back of the plate, because I'm sitting there in the Sopranos house, and this character thinks this is how the rich people live, and this is how the powerful people live. And she's just taken by all of what's going on. So he said, look around. And he says, and then when you can, look at the back of the plate to see who made what china that is and all. And I thought, that's a great idea. I said, but I need a reason to do that. Can I have some food or something on the table? So when I finish the food, I can maybe look at the plate, to put more on it or whatever. But I had to have a reason to turn and he said, great, wonderful. And he put all this food out, but it was all like really salty. And so the more takes we did, the more my mouth was like just full of salt. But it was so great, because it's like the creative process fitting into his vision. And I remember saying at one point, because we kept saying, let's try this, let's try that. And Edie Falco was sitting there, and I said, is he happy? Is he? She said, oh no, he does this all the time. If he wasn't giving you any direction, over and over, it would not be good, so it's fine. It's good. It was great. The people were amazing. I was so thrilled to be a part of that show. And Jim Gandolfini said to me, where have you been? Afterwards, always said, where have you been for 10 years? I said, waiting for you to call, so I was just, it's a very special thing for me, that show and that part.
I have to tell you, Donna, the impression I get, you've been in this industry a long time, 5 decades. You still project a sense of wonder and gratitude about being a working actress. You have no sense of being jaded or bitter. I know you must have had your share of disappointments in this business. You couldn't be a veteran star as you are without having had disappointments, but you've kept yourself so balanced.
Not always. You go through hills and valleys with all of that. And I was, especially when you're young and you don't know so much of how things are decided and all of that. So you do go through stages. I think I went through a stage of maybe being a little bratty. I went through a stage of being a little bitter, but they were small. They were tiny little things because I was so blessed to have work come in, so it wasn't like I suddenly wasn't working. It was just different, but somewhere along the line, and I think this is true for every actor, somewhere along the line, you make a decision if you're going to let this change you or kill you, or you're going to make it work for you and just know you're in a very small club that gets to have longevity in this industry and also have a life outside of the business. So you're not looking for validation constantly to be walking on this earth, But
you talk about being blessed. Do you ever think about how much of your success is attributable to talent, hard work, ambition, and how much of it would you say was destiny or good luck?
I think luck plays an enormous part of this. There are talented people in every profession who should have had a bigger career or a bigger break, but just somehow, right place, right time, I don't know what it is, karma, whatever fate, whatever you want to call it, I think that plays into it no matter what. And for a lot of people, I think you were talking about bitter and being bitter. I think what happens is there's so much disappointment that they grow disappointed in an angry way. And so everything becomes this overview of it's going to, this is never going to be right, and it's never going to be good, and they're going to try and, hurt me in the end or whatever. I think that the joy of the work and the ability to recognize the fact that, man, you're lucky. Even if you don't think you are, you're lucky, because there's a line of people longer than you can imagine who'd be real happy to take your place. So be grateful.
Well, nobody's going to take your place because your likability, your warmth, your sincerity jumps out from the screen, even on Zoom. I got to tell you, it's been such a pleasure meeting you, Donna. You're just wonderful.
Well, it's mutual. It's so mutual, Harvey. I'm so glad we finally got to do this. I really, really am.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show and giving me this opportunity to interview you. And you are welcome back anytime.
Oh, well, count on it. Absolutely.
Our guest has been the wonderful actress and director, Donna Pescow. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producers, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli of the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my editor, Isaiah Sharalampidis, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.